I was at McKinsey. I've been a business executive, so I know all about being able to chart the right course. But at the other side of that, you still need people to do the job. So as a social scientist, I studied a lot about human behavior, patterns of behavior, how people come together in community, how cultures are formed. And all of that, if you put those things together, you put the business strategy and people side by side, I think that really is the ingredient for driving performance transformation and doing so thoughtfully. You can't have one without the other. You can't just be all about, let me create a great workplace and it's going to be lovely. And that can't be divorced from your business strategy. So again, the two have to go in lockstep. There is no strategy without people to execute, and there is no people agenda or talent strategy that shouldn't hang on what you are trying to achieve as an organization.
Hello, and welcome to the Mental Health Advantage podcast, where HR, benefits, and total rewards leaders explore the future of workplace well-being. I'm your host, Stephen Sokoler, founder and CEO of Journey, the leading proactive mental health solution for modern companies. Today, I'm joined by Kaleen Love, Chief People and Culture Officer at PMI, Philip Morris International, in the U.S. Kaleen's story spans Oxford, McKinsey, Capital One, and now PMI, and the thread through all of it is transformation. Whether she's advising C-suites or leading teams of thousands, she's using data, discipline, and deep empathy to drive lasting change. Does that sound about right?
Sounds great. Very flattering.
All right. So your path has taken you from Bangladesh to the C-suite of a Fortune 100 company. When did you first realize that people, not just policies or systems, were the key to sustainable transformation?
It might have been in my McKinsey days when we did a lot of PowerPoints and were able to put together very interesting business strategies. But at the end of the day, we talked a lot about how what mattered was impact, right? And for impact to happen, things have to move. And guess what moves? People. And so I've seen through time and time again, that if you want to transform, if businesses have new strategies or new destinations or want to achieve new heights, there's no way they can do that without mobilizing the energy of their workforce, without mobilizing the energy of people. You got to have a good strategy. You got to run the numbers. But again, without the energy of your people, you're never going to make it.
Absolutely. So you spent a lot of years in consulting, helping a variety of large organizations drive performance transformation. How does that background influence how you lead people strategy today?
Again, I think I'd double down on this notion of it's all about impact. And so if it's about impact, you have to ensure that, number one, the business strategy is excellent, is really fit for purpose. Like I said, I was at McKinsey. I've been a business executive, so I know all about being able to chart the right course. But at the other side of that, you still need people to do the job. So as a social scientist, I studied a lot about human behavior, patterns of behavior, how people come together in community, how cultures are formed. And all of that, if you put those things together, you put the business strategy and people side by side, I think that really is the ingredient for driving performance transformation and doing so thoughtfully. You can't have one without the other. You can't just be all about, let me create a great workplace and it's going to be lovely. And that can't be divorced from your business strategy. So again, the two have to go in lockstep. There is no strategy without people to execute, and there is no people agenda or talent strategy that shouldn't hang on what you are trying to achieve as an organization.
I love that. And let's add another element or layer on another element, which is culture, right? The old culture eats strategy for breakfast adage, right? So what do most companies get wrong when trying to shift culture? Where do they start too soft or too late or just miss the mark?
So if I break that down into kind of what do a lot of companies get wrong? Well, I think what you see happen sometimes is that they view culture as just sort of this soft thing that is where HR operates. It's like an HR thing. It's a people and culture thing. It's a program that I'm just going to go run a culture program and make it work. And so thinking of it as an isolated program that sits with your people function is where I think companies get it wrong, because it is, again, the lifeblood of any organization. It's simply put the way things work around here. And as such, it touches on all elements of the business and the organization. Culture is the business. Culture eats strategy for breakfast, because your strategy is simply people delivering against a clear set of objectives together in a well-organized way. So in terms of how companies can then think about shifting culture, or actually, trying to achieve the outcome of shifting culture, I've always thought of a very simple framework, again, harkening back to my McKinsey times. But it was this notion of culture being the way things work around here, and ultimately how things get done means that it's a systems. It's so systems thinking is required here. And there's four things that need to be true in order for culture to shift. Thing one, you need to actually have a story. Why? Why are we going to do the new thing? Why is it important that we do it this way? Thing two, the system itself has to support you doing that. For example, incentives. Think of if you said, I'm going to create a more team-based structure. Yay, my culture is going to be so super team-based. And then all of your performance incentives were tied to the individual, and there were no team-based incentives. Probably not going to be super successful. So again, I need to know the why, and I need to know this, the sort of surrounding system, the surround architecture needs to support the things we're asking people to do. Thing three, you have to be able to do the thing that's being asked of you. This is a capabilities play. I want us to go be AI enabled and totally digital and digital first. Okay, cool. How do I do that? What are the skills and capabilities I need in order to accomplish that thing? I'm not a blocker. I'd love to be a more digitally enabled workforce, but I need a skill to do that. So the skills and capabilities are also required. And last, but definitely not least, in this concept of how do you shift culture, how do you shift context to shift culture, importantly, it's this idea of leader role modeling. If leaders and my peers do not behave in the new way, if they do not role model the things we're talking about, there is no faster way to an unsuccessful culture change than that. And again, you talk about we're going to be a caring, imagine, caring workplace. We're going to really nurture, and then you got a bunch of jerks leading the place. Recipe for failure. So again, the idea of if you need to shift culture, shift context. And in order to shift the context, this whole system has to be in play. From the why to the system itself, the structures and incentives support it, to the skills and capabilities are being supported. And last but not least, the leaders are taking the symbolic actions to actually deliver on the things that they want to talk about. It has to be practice, not just preach.
I love that. I feel like there's so many good nuggets in there. Obviously we're in the mental health space, and we talk about benefits. And what I always talk to people leaders about is, right, the benefits are just the start, right? Like, it's the culture that's going to determine whether this works or not. Have we reduced stigma, right? Have we created permission to talk about and care for their mental health? Have we trained managers to be the eyes and ears? How can we create this and make sure that things can really flourish there, right? That the soil is good. I feel like you know better than anyone, that culture change should be approached like any other transformation, right? With structure, with ownership, with milestones. Can you unpack that a little bit for us?
Absolutely. I'll talk about three things here. Thing one is that framework I just mentioned, i.e. this four-part kind of change model. That's, if you shift the context, you can shift the culture. So on all of those elements, you can have a plan. We can look at our storytelling, and do we have a compelling why? Do we have a compelling narrative and purpose around what we're asking people to do differently or better or otherwise? Have we looked at our performance incentives? Are our performance incentives lined up against the things we're telling people to value or to value differently? So on all of those dimensions, I know why you're asking me to do it. The system supports me. I've got the skills and capabilities to deliver, and leaders are behaving in that way. All of those have plans. All of those have programmatic interventions you come with. But then thing two, how do you do that and roll that out in a way? And I think the easiest way I think of it is sort of a military campaign and a marketing campaign. So the military campaign means it's very structured. You've got KPIs, or you have OKRs, objectively knowable results. Like, what are the things? How are you going to measure? How are you going to monitor? How are you going to roll out? If you're on a performance cycle, How do you ensure your incentives are clearly communicated before, so then you get the behavior change you want, etc. So there's that notion of discipline and structure and interdependencies with everything that you need to deliver. But then the marketing campaign, again, you have to win hearts and minds. If we're asking people to behave in a slightly different way, what's in it for them? What is the meaning? What's the significance? And this ability to tap into someone's, kind of their social capital, their willingness and desire to be part of the team, all of that energy, tapping into that energy is really about, again, a marketing campaign that's selling people on the vision of this culture, selling people on why this type of environment is going to help us all be more successful than we could have ever imagined. And that's going to be really important. And last but not least, and it connects to this role modeling point I made earlier, leaders have to be bought in. This is not an HR-led initiative. If HR and the chief people officer comes and announces some culture program, it will not work. That needs to be the CEO-led. It needs to be top team-led. Absolutely, people and culture, HR, whatever you call your people function in your organization, plays a radically important part in nurturing and stewarding the culture. But if it doesn't start at the top and you don't have leaders bought in that this is how we're going to do it, it won't work. I'll give you one example. At PMI, we rolled out, actually, PNC, People and Culture, our HR function, did a significant body of research to begin to crystallize what we then called our PMI DNA, our cultural values and tenets. They revolve around we care, we're better together, and we're game changers. And there are specific behaviors under each one of these that then inform a leadership model. This was absolutely sourced through our employees, and again, focus group discussions and a lot of it, really figuring out how to crystallize what makes this place special and what matters to us from a cultural perspective. But you better believe the CEO and the senior management team of this company needed to sit around and they needed to stack hands and they needed to say, we're going to do this and we're going to roll it out and we're going to stand up in front of our people and we're going to talk about this and we're going to make a commitment. When you have both of those things operating in tandem, i.e. the bottom up energy around it and the top down commitment, that's also going to be a critical ingredient for the success of any culture transformation.
Yeah, and we find the same thing when it comes to driving engagement. It's kind of one of our core differentiators is the fact that we drive significantly higher engagement. And we talk about it can't just be this HR initiative where HR is sending emails, into the abyss, right? It has to be top down. It has to be bottom up. Let's get, grassroots. Let's build champion programs and ambassadors. And then we think about side to side from HR to ERGs and being able to really meet people where they are and just coming at it consistently to make sure that people are seeing things and getting awareness. And so you mentioned winning over the hearts and minds, which I love. Let's talk a little bit about empathy and joy, and how do you integrate empathy and systems thinking across those different lanes?
Yeah. First and foremost, I think we can appreciate that if we want to innovate, if we want to grow, if we want to do new things, then that requires having different perspectives around the table, right? Diverse voices, diverse ways of thinking, different ways of viewing the world. And otherwise, it's the same old, same old. So how do we have both diverse opinions and diverse thinking at the table? And then how do we invite those voices into the conversation? And that's inclusion, right? And I mentioned earlier our DNA. And we very clearly, as a company, we talk a lot about innovation. We talk a lot about empathy in our DNA and inclusion in our DNA, because we believe that these are ingredients to innovation. We believe that these are ingredients to actually thinking about game-changing new ways of meeting consumer needs in the marketplace and continuing to advance the company. So that thing one is this idea of, again, diverse opinions and inclusive behaviors matter to the bottom line, and they're absolutely embedded in our value set and DNA. Another important point here is, I'll call it, systems thinking. I think you've mentioned this, the notion of systems thinking. As a social scientist who studied society and anthropology as a discipline to look at, again, the interconnections of people and power and tribes and communities and organizations and governments. And, ultimately it's people coming together in groups, and people coming together in groups, not just as individuals, are what makes the world go around. And so if you think about systems thinking and apply that, there's also an element of, again, human and machine that we need to start thinking about in very new ways. So if I bring people leadership and tech and diverse, perspectives and the inclusive behaviors. All of these to me talk about how do we orchestrate a dance between human and machine going forward that really brings different skill sets to the table. And so on that, there's one last point I'll make, which is as we think about bringing different skill sets to the table, I think it's more important than ever that we think about these EQ or human skills. You mentioned empathy. I think you said the word joy. I think a lot about this because I think as the world continues to advance, as AI and all forms of intelligence start to perform some of the tasks humans used to perform, what do we as humans bring to that equation? What do we bring to that dance between human and machine? And I think we bring the things that make us most human: empathy and joy and all these things that unlock discretionary energy and commitment and passion. You think about the energy I'm going to bring, the commitment I'm going to bring to something when I am connected as a human to that cause is going to be outsized versus anything else that is just a clock in, clock out. And so, again, I think this notion of what makes us most human, if we can really bring that to our workplaces in this interesting new way where what makes us human and what machine come together in the system to go out and achieve amazing outcomes, I think we're going to flourish. I think we're going to see people giving us their discretionary energy to go after new, exciting adventures.
I love that. So let's stay on the innovation part. So you've led innovation and analytics teams, and how did those roles shape your view of the employee experience?
On the innovation side, again, I talked a little bit about this notion of you're not going to get innovation unless you have different perspectives at the table and you hear them. And so I'm going to bring back this concept of psychological safety. I think it's really important. If you assemble the best team in the world and they don't feel psychologically safe to raise their voice and say, hold on a second, don't love that, or how about this, or how might we do this other thing, you're not going to get the value of those perspectives. And so I think a lot, again, about psychological safety and how do we make sure that our teams are willing to raise their hand and say, nope, I don't agree with you. By the way, in some of my past roles, I would get someone on the team who was like a plant and I would like have them challenge me in meetings, and then I would respond well to the challenge, right? I remember one of my analysts at Capital One, Jake, and he would always be like, Kaleen, I disagree with you. And I was like, great, let's use this as a litmus test. But how can we have open conversation, open disagreement, and actually move forward productively? I think that's a important success factor for innovation. I think on the analytics side, it's much more around the critical thinking, the analytical rigor, the power of data, and the power of data, the so what of data. And I think the importance of analytics comes together in these, if we think about kind of innovation, analytics, and frankly, the human side of all of this, is it's data to tell stories. Recently, I've coached a few folks on my team who have brought me numbers, and they're like, great, I'm showing you a number. It's the budget, or we achieved an X% acceptance rate. And I said, great, love it, thank you. What does that mean? I don't know if let's call it 70%. I don't know if 70% is a good number or a bad number. You have to put it in context. What is benchmark? What is best, et cetera? And so this idea of data is critical, but analytical approaches to storytelling and bringing data in always have to reference and couch things in like, what's the so what? What's the so what of the numbers? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it better? Or is it worse? How do I think about it? What is the framework I need in my brain in order to kind of process these numbers? Typically, you can look at a P&L, you can know, oh, that's up, that's down, that's good, that's bad. But in the world we live in, and particularly the world of employment and skills data and transformation and culture, we have to be able to tell stories with data, with numbers, but also couched in meaning and being able to make sense of the world around us.
Thanks for listening to the first half of the episode. I hope you're walking away with some valuable insights. I want to take a quick pause to tell you about my book, The Mental Health Advantage. If you found this conversation useful, you'll find 300 more pages packed with strategies, insights, and real-world applications. Grab your copy on Amazon. Just check the show notes for the link. And if you're looking for a more comprehensive mental health solution for your company, let's chat. You'll find another link in the show notes to reach out and explore how Journey can help you. Now back to the show. I often talk about the difference between data and information. Like in our category, companies will give like this massive amount of data and you can't tell up from down or left from right. It's so confusing. And I'm like, we're giving you actual information that you can use to run the business, to make decisions. So as a social scientist, what's the role of storytelling in transforming data into meaning, especially as it pertains to well-being?
I love it. I've already kind of jumped the gun on that one clearly, since I love storytelling and think story is so important. I'm just going to wax philosophical for 1 second and then I'll go to this. But I love storytelling. Again, I've talked a little bit about what makes us human. And I feel, and I believe that storytelling is so essential to our kind of humanity, our ability to connect, purpose, community, belonging, all those things. I will suggest a poem to you, and you can read this at your leisure at another time. But it's from Robert Penn Warren, and his poem is called "Tell Me a Story." And his words have always stuck with me, because he says at the end of this beautiful poem, it says, "Tell me a story. In this century and moment of mania, tell me a story. Make it a story of great distances and starlight." The world is not getting any less turbulent. And sometimes, to make sense of the world around us, as people, as humans, one of the best tools we have at our disposal is storytelling. We're sense making. We're making sense of things. We're making meaning. We're connecting. And so I think there's, again, going back to then, okay, so what's the business application of this? There's really nothing more compelling than a great story that brings data to life.
So let's talk about what are some of the best ways to cultivate trust and psychological safety. You touched on this a little bit when an organization is undergoing a radical transformation.
So I'll talk about two things. One is, again, this notion of integrity, humility, authenticity, right? So leaders who say one thing and then do that thing, right? And so I think when you can expect leaders to say, "I invite feedback," and then when you give them feedback, they receive the feedback, right? So there's this notion of, again, humility, learning, authenticity. And I think when you see that role modeled and you see that begin to permeate through the leadership and management, you begin to feel safe and be willing to kind of make your voice known. The other thing I've always loved this equation. Again, this is the geek in me loving equations for trust. So a trust equation says trust equals, and then it's three things all divided by something. So trust equals credibility times reliability times intimacy, all divided by self-orientation. So credibility, you know what you're talking about, multiplied by reliability. When you say you're going to do something, you do it. Multiplied by intimacy, you're a human. You're a human. You're authentic. You're a human. I know you as a person, and therefore it's more easy to trust. All divided by, all of those things can be undermined by self-orientation. Do I think you're in it for you, or are you actually in it for the team? Are you in it for me? Do you care about me? And I think when we're talking about radical change, how do we cultivate trust? How do we cultivate psychological safety? I think that there's a sense of, again, authentic, caring leaders. You can't, there's no workaround for that. You talk about well-being, it matters. If your leaders care about you as a human and understand your full-fledged well-being and it matters to them, that's what's an incredibly important ingredient. And then the other thing is how to build trust and maintain trust. I think a lot of organizations have very credible people. A lot of organizations have very reliable people. But again, this concept of intimacy in leadership to build trust means I'm a human and I care about you as a human. And trust can be completely undermined by self-orientation. And I think that's really important as well. So if you're trying to cultivate trust, trying to cultivate safety, if you can continue to encourage and cultivate leaders who are in it for the greater good and in it for the organization and not just their silo or not just their fiefdom, and you can work to break down silos and really encourage, again, that collaborative, we're better together. By the way, that's our DNA. We're better together, and we celebrate the successes of other folks around us. Again, that's how you're going to win.
Yeah. And how do companies evolve from offering perks to building cultures where people feel like they belong and can thrive? We touched on some of this, but I'm curious if there's more that you want to share.
Probably the only build, since I've mentioned again some of our cultural values. We care, we're better together, we're game changers. I think here in the US, particularly, we think a lot about resilience, agility, growth. And we know that in order to go after all the things we're trying to do here in the US, we need to actually create this sense of joy and belonging. I think of it as the joy of belonging to this team. And this team is going to win all day, every day, if we really have that clear purpose, well structured play on the field, and a sense of joy for the cause and each other's teammates, right? Well being. Without that connection to people, you're not going to have good well being, right? And so I think this goes back to the notion of, is it perks or is it benefits? And I think your benefits strategy absolutely needs to underpin the organization you're building and the core culture you're trying to support. So, for example, we think a lot about this idea that everyone should have the chance to succeed here. We really want this to be an environment where everyone can have that chance, all can have that chance to succeed. So, what does that mean? That might mean that we invest in a suite of benefits or ancillary benefits that support people, whether it's different life phases that they might have, whether it's different abilities or access requirements they might have. All of those matter. So that's just phase of life, full human type thinking. Another example would be we're now working with an organization called Maven to offer perimenopause and menopausal benefits. I'm not going to tell you how old I am, Stephen, but let me just say I'm super pumped about this particular benefit suite because guess what? Your workforce, your female workforce is going to experience this at a particular phase. So how do you make sure that you really are doubling down and offering things to think of the whole person and therefore what needs they have that you can fulfill as an employer in order to enable them to be successful at work? And so, again, I think if we think about humans, we think about different phases of life, different communities, different needs, and we can def- define and determine a benefit strategy to really ensure all have the chance to be successful here, we can create a workplace of choice and we can go win.
Yeah, and I think that ties in nicely also with what you had mentioned before about the diversity and inclusion components of it, right? Of there's certain things that I can relate to from an intellectual understanding, but it's different when it's an experiential thing, right? Like being a new parent, right? Now sitting in that seat, it's very different, and so it
Yeah.
opens my eyes to everything else. And so having those diverse perspectives and lived experiences around the table are really mission critical in terms of benefits and culture and leadership
Mm.
and on and on. So let's transition from the human into the world of the robots, or to say it differently, the age of AI. You touched on it before. So how do you see HR's role evolving as we start to see more and more AI?
Again, I think I mentioned this earlier. It's the concept of the interconnectedness and interplay of human and machine, and ultimately, the head of HR won't be the head of HR. It'll be H&MR, human and machine resources, or ultimately, it's about how work gets done around here, and how do we then have a kind of a skills based framework for work. I can't remember if I said it exactly this way earlier, but AI, in my view, AI doesn't replace jobs. AI replaces skills. Jobs are just bundles of skills. And so, how can I, in my role, get much smarter at beginning to make visible the bundles and baskets of skills that people have that we need, and then find opportunities to upskill, reskill, move work around? Ultimately, we have to achieve certain outcomes. But the skills that humans have, the skills that machines have, it's about putting these together in new mixes. It's ingredients for new recipes. And so whether you think of the future of HR as an orchestra conductor, a master chef, however you want to think about it, but ultimately it's about, again, bringing together these ingredients at the ingredient level. Because right now we think of jobs, and jobs they're just a combination of ingredients.
And as you think about the difference between jobs being replaced and skills being augmented. How should people leaders orchestrate that balance?
Again, I think, as I mentioned, it's this complex interplay between the human skills, machine skills, and I know everyone's saying AI is going to take over the world. Well, not yet, just not yet, not today. And so again, how do we get people who are smarter and how do we augment? I do think it's important that we're proactively identifying, again, like I said, that the skills that will be obsolete and or replaced. And this goes back to, like, for me specifically, let's say we're looking into partnering with a couple companies that might be able to give us this AI enabled way of defining skills and AI required skills. So it's using AI to determine AI, which is great. It's an AI inference model. But ultimately, if I had a set of skills and we were able to look at all this, and then we were able to say, of the skills that Kaleen has, which of these have higher skill obsolescence, right, are going to become obsolete, and obsolete because they're either automated or no longer required, and then which of the skills have more staying power. Okay, of the skills that she has, how do we either amplify or augment those, or how do we reskill or upskill? So at the end of the day, there's no world wherein companies, organizations shouldn't be having really smartly honed learning journeys and capability building journeys. But I think we've kind of done it a little like, AI is coming for your jobs. No one should be afraid. How do we in the business, and frankly, even from a well-being perspective, how do we make sure this doesn't become a source of anxiety, but a source of opportunity? How are we going to get smarter? How do we get to automate out of our jobs the things that we hate about our jobs? How are we able to unlock new things and do things that we never had been able to do in the absence of AI? How do we make sure that we each have individual learning paths that are going to help us with build on the skills that we have that are unique and to have some staying power, and replace them or add skills that we might need that are new for the future? So I think that there needs to be, again, this openness to learning, this openness to being a little uncomfortable, that it's not going to look the same tomorrow as it did today. But this anxiety around, like, it's all coming for your jobs today. It's like, okay, let's take a breath. Let's move forward systematically and thoughtfully. Let's get the scope of the problem. Let's begin to apply, again, learning pathways to the areas we know are going to be, moved into a more automated AI-enabled tech system, and go from there. But my hope is that we start to view this as an opportunity and really can reduce, I think, some of the anxiety around it, so that people can embrace learning and leaning into it in a new way.
Yeah, there is tremendous opportunity, and the fear is real for a lot of people. And I think, given that our area of expertise is mental health, there's so much to worry about in today's world
Yeah.
that it could be all consuming, and it's important to really be able to have practices to help you navigate life more skillfully and thoughtfully.
Yeah.
All right, so many good tips, tricks, insights. I want to end by I'll give you two questions, and you can choose whichever one you want. So, one question: what gives you hope about the next generation of people leaders? And the other: what's something you changed your mind about as a leader? Either of those. Which one's speaking to you right now?
I'll maybe end on the note of hope and optimism, since I was just talking about how we needed to view opportunity in the future and how tech can make our lives better versus just taking jobs, and how do we embrace that. If I think about what gives me hope about the next generation of people leaders, I guess it depends a little on what you call the next generation of people leaders. So I will use two different groups. Group one would be, those entering the workforce. We just introduced our new class of interns here in PMI U.S. Bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, brilliant, thoughtful. It's our first ever time of having interns. We had 7,000 applications. We brought 16 here. And seeing the questions that they ask, seeing how thoughtful they are, really seeing them embrace and be open to change, and like, yeah, I can roll with it. So a sense of that agility, that adaptiveness. They're obviously digital natives, and they're comfortable with being uncomfortable. They seem more, adept at being adaptive, right? And I think that it gives me a lot of hope that we're going to have to be able to change and to change at pace. And the younger generations are leaning in with that curiosity and ability to learn. But they are beautiful people. And that's what I hope for the future. They are kids who are kind, who are smart, who are brave, who I'm trying to teach to be helpers. And that's the important thing. Go be a helper, right? Find somewhere to help. But if I'm a successful parent and they do become the next generation of leaders, then I have a lot of hope for kindness, for helpers, and frankly, for kind of compassion and courage.
I love that. I love that. And I'm sure the Army thing, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it. I mean, I'm not there yet with my guy under 2, but I do love the idea of just like seeing them be whoever they want to be, whatever gravitates, whatever they gravitate to, and things like that. So anyway, thank you for ending on such a beautiful human story, and I really appreciate you sharing so openly, your heart, your strategy, your mind, all the different things that you've picked up along the way, and really giving us a master class in how the combination of data and empathy and culture can come together to build something that really transforms organizations. So thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciate it very, very much.
Well, thank you for having me, Stephen. And again, I think the work that you are doing in the space of well-being is incredibly important. So keep fighting the good fight. We're grateful to be partnering with you.
The world certainly needs it.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Kaleen. Speak to you soon.
All right. Cheers. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for spending this time with us. We know you're busy. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to subscribe to the Mental Health Advantage and leave a review. Thanks so much and have a beautiful day.